It begins quietly. Almost too quietly. Jonathan Hayes, a man known to the world as a commanding CEO, stepped out into the parking lot that night with the weight of an empire pressing on his shoulders. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who seemed untouchable to those who only knew his name. But here, alone beneath the dim glow of the garage lights, he was simply a man who longed to get home, loosen his tie, and let go of another exhausting day. The air was still, thick, with the faint scent of oil and concrete. The only sound was the echo of his shoes as he approached his sleek black car. His thoughts drifted. To the meeting tomorrow, to the partnership deal he had trusted others to prepare, to the years of sacrifice that had led him here. He slipped his hand into his pocket for his keys. And that's when it happened. A voice. Small, sharp, and urgent. "Shut up." Jonathan froze. His keys hung halfway in the air, his breath caught like a trapped bird in his chest. For a moment, he thought he must have imagined it, a trick of exhaustion, a whisper born from stress. But then, softer, almost trembling, it came again. "Shut up! Don't say a word." The sound came from inside his car.
Before we continue, please do subscribe to my channel. His heart stumbled. He leaned forward, peering through the tinted glass, and saw not what he expected. Not an intruder, not a thief, but a child. Oh, a little girl, no more than 7, curled up in the back seat. Her skin dark against the pale leather, her eyes wide and reflecting the garage lights like liquid stars. She looked fragile, but there was a fire flickering inside her gaze. Jonathan whispered back, his voice lower than he had ever spoken before. "Who are you?" The girl shook her head fiercely. "Not now. You're listening." She lifted one trembling hand and pointed not at him, not at the car, but toward the tall glass tower that rose behind them. His company building, the place he had built from nothing. Jonathan's stomach turned cold. "Listening? Who's listening?" "Your partner," she breathed in his wife. "The one with the blonde hair. They know you came down here. They said it was tonight." Her words were a tangle of fear and certainty, too specific to dismiss as nonsense. Jonathan slowly opened the driver's door, sliding inside without a sound. The car closed. Around him, like a sealed chamber, the leather creaked. The girl pressed herself smaller against the back seat, eyes darting toward the building as if invisible ears could catch her breath. Jonathan's voice was steady, but inside his pulse thundered. "How did you get in here?" "The cleaning lady left it open. I slipped in. I had to." Her tiny fingers clenched around the edge of the seat. "I heard them upstairs. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. They said you'll sign papers tomorrow, that after that, you won't have anything left." The words landed like stones sinking into dark water. Jonathan sat back, trying to appear calm even as the ground beneath him shifted. The meeting tomorrow. The merger he had trusted Marcus to arrange. Diana, his assistant of 10 years, who had handled every page, every detail. The girl's voice shook, but her eyes never left his. "They laughed at you, said you're so loyal, you'll just sign without reading. They said the day after tomorrow. You'll be finished." Jonathan inhaled slowly, letting the air move through him as though he could steady his storm. In the hush of the car, the child's presence felt almost unreal. A phantom messenger. But no phantom could look at him with such raw urgency, such unguarded truth. His mind wanted to deny it. Marcus was his friend, his brother in business for 15 years. Diana had been at his side through divorces, through late nights, through victories. But the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. And this little girl, this stranger, had just placed words to the suspicion he had been too afraid to name. He forced a thin smile, though it trembled at the edges. "What's your name?" Her lips hesitated before shaping the word, Amara. Jonathan repeated it softly as if testing the sound of it. Amara. It rolled gently in his mouth like something fragile and precious. "Amara," he whispered back. "Why tell me this? Why not just run away?" She lowered her gaze, fingers twisting together. Because my grandma always said, if you see someone about to get hurt and you can help, you help. Even if you're small. Even if no one sees you. Because next time, it could be you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of trust not yet earned, of truths not yet proven. Of a fragile bond beginning to take root, Jonathan leaned back into the seat, the hum of the city faint in the distance. He watched Amara through the rearview mirror, her small body taut with fear, her eyes alert and wise beyond her years. And in that moment, something stirred in him, something he hadn't felt in far too long. Not just suspicion, not just anger, but hope, as if fate, strange and quiet, had sent him a guardian in the form of a trembling little girl who told him to shut up. The car was hushed, holding the two of them in a bubble of stillness. The air seemed thick, almost heavy, as though even sound itself was afraid to move. Jonathan's fingers rested on the steering wheel, though the engine remained silent. He didn't turn the key. He didn't even shift in his seat. His mind was racing, but outwardly, he kept still, because the child in the back seat had told him to. Her small voice cut the silence again, soft, trembling, but with a strength. Threaded through it, you can't trust them. Jonathan kept his tone calm, measured. Trust who? Amara? She leaned forward, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath on the back of his neck. Her eyes flicked once more toward the glowing tower of glass that loomed over the lot. Marcus and the woman, the blonde one. I heard them in the office upstairs. They were waiting for you to leave. His chest tightened at the sound of those names.
Acus.
His partner for over a decade, Diana, the one who had run his life with precision for so many years. They weren't just colleagues. They were family. At least that's what he had believed. But Amara's words landed with the weight of truth. They said, "You're too proud to see what's happening," she whispered, as though repeating it pained her. They said, "Tomorrow, when the Japanese men come, you'll sign the papers. You'll hand over everything. And after that, you'll be nothing." Her voice faltered on that last word. Nothing. Jonathan swallowed, the sound loud in the still car. His hands were steady on the wheel, but only because he forced them to be. And how would you know all this, Amara? Why would you even care? Didn't flinch at his sharpness. Instead, her shoulders rose and fell in a small, tired shrug. Because I was there, I was cleaning. Sometimes they let us stay late, if we don't make noise, and I heard them. Her wide eyes lifted to meet his in the mirror, glimmering with fear and certainty. They don't see me, Mr. Hayes. People. Like them, they never see kids like me. But I was there. I heard everything. He turned slightly in his seat, his gaze holding hers directly now. Tell me what you heard. Word for word. Mara's lips pressed together as if she were replaying it in her mind. Then with slow precision she began. The man laughed. Marcus, he said, Jonathan will sign like he always does. He never checks the fine print. Her small hands clenched into fists. The woman laughed too. She said, he's so obedient, like a dog. Tomorrow he signs it all away, and the next day he'll be out in the cold. Jonathan's jaw locked. The words rang with a cruel familiarity. The laughter, the arrogance, he could almost hear their voices layered over hers. Amara shifted, hugging her knees. They said you're blind. That you'd never imagine it could be them. And that once it's done, you won't be the owner of anything anymore. She glanced away, ashamed, as if repeating it was an insult of her own. I know kids aren't supposed to repeat bad words, but they called you stupid, Mr. Hayes. Over and over. Something broke inside him at that. Not anger, not yet, but a deeper ache. For years, he had carried them both, trusted them, believed in them. And all this time, they had mocked him. His voice was low, gentle now. Why tell me? Why not keep it to yourself, Amara? You don't even know me. Her chin lifted, her gaze firm despite the tremble in her lip. Because I know what it feels like when people pretend you're invisible. I know what it's like. When they step on you, when they laugh because they think you're too small to fight back. She hugged her knees tighter. My grandma always said, you see someone being stepped on and you can help, you do it. Because next time, it might be you. Her words wrapped around him, steadying him more than she knew. They weren't the words of a child. They were the words of someone who had seen too much, who had carried too much, far too soon. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, Jonathan felt clarity. He leaned back in his seat, the leather sighing beneath him, let his breath fall into rhythm with the hush of the garage, slower, softer, like the beginning of a lullaby. He glanced, again, into the rearview mirror. At this little girl with eyes like lanterns in the dark. "You've given me something, Amara," he said quietly. "More than a warning. You've given me time. Time to prepare." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to ask what he meant. But Jonathan only started the engine, the soft hum filling the silence like a heartbeat. The lights of the garage flickered. Passed as they pulled away, the world outside still asleep, unaware of the storm brewing in its high glass towers, and in the back seat. The girl who told him to shut up leaned against the door, still watchful, still alert, as though her fight was not over, as though this was only the beginning. The night air outside the campus library was heavy, still carrying the aftertaste of rain. The pavement shimmered faintly under the glow of lampposts, as though the world itself was breathing in silence. Anna stepped out, clutching her worn canvas bag against her chest. Her steps were cautious, slow, as though she was carrying naught. Just books, but a weight she couldn't set down. She had stayed late again. Not because she needed more study, but because the library's quiet was safer than the laughter-filled cafeteria or the cruelly watchful hallways. Yet even here, shadows followed her mocking whispers. Stray comments carved into silence, eyes that never softened. As she walked, the echo of shoes behind her made her tense. She froze, her breath catching. It was him, Liam, the one who led the cruel jokes, the one whose words, sharp as glass, had cut her days into smaller and smaller pieces. Anna lowered her head and tried to keep walking. But his laugh, soft, calculated, traveled across the damp night. "Walking alone again?" he asked, his voice carrying a casual cruelty. "You really think anyone cares where you disappear to?" Her chest tightened. Her hands gripped her bag until her knuckles whitened. She told herself to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't heard. But her body trembled, betraying her, and then something changed. From across the quiet parking lot, a voice cut through the air. Not loud, not angry, but steady. "Leave her alone." Anna's heart jolted. Turned toward the sound. A young man stepped out of the shadows near the old oak tree. He wasn't tall, wasn't dressed to impress. His jacket was worn. His shoes muddied, but his eyes held a kind of quiet strength that froze the moment in place. Liam scoffed, smirk tugging at his mouth. "And who are you supposed to be?" The stranger didn't answer right away. He simply took a few steps closer, his posture calm yet unshakable, like a stone in a storm. His presence seemed to carve a line through the night. A line Liam would have to cross to get to Anna. "I said leave her alone," the stranger repeated, his voice low, unwavering. For a second, silence thickened between them. Anna's heart thudded painfully. No one had ever spoken up for her, not once. Not in all the weeks of taunts and laughter. She had grown used to invisibility, to swallowing every wound without a sound. And now, here was someone who saw her. Liam sneered. "Big words for someone I've never seen around here." The stranger tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Liam's. "You don't need to see me. Just know that this ends tonight." The firmness in his tone wasn't aggressive, it was protective. There was no hunger for a fight in his stance, only the quiet insistence that cruelty would not pass. Anna felt something stir inside her, fragile and unfamiliar. "Hope," Liam muttered under his breath and finally turned away, muttering something about not wasting time. His footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the stranger and Anna standing in the silver glow of the lamppost. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Anna's breath came uneven, as if her body hadn't caught up with what just happened. Finally, the stranger looked at her. His gaze softened, his voice gentler than the night breeze. "Are you all right?" Anna swallowed hard, her throat tight. I think so." He nodded as though that was enough for now. He didn't ask for details. He didn't press. He simply stood there, making the empty parking lot feel less dangerous. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly, as if he had heard the words forming in her mind. "No one deserves to walk through this alone." Anna blinked against the sting in her eyes. She had learned long ago not to trust kindness. It often hid sharp edges. But something about this stranger felt different. His presence wasn't about being noticed. It was about making sure she was safe enough to breathe. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly, though. It carried a trace of sadness. "Daniel." Connor repeated it softly to herself, grounding the moment in memory. Daniel, a name wrapped in courage she hadn't expected to find tonight. He walked beside her toward the campus gates, keeping just enough distance to respect her space, but close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. As they reached the edge of the road, he paused. "I don't know what they've done to you," he said gently, "but I know the look of someone who's been carrying too much. You don't have to explain. Just don't believe the lies they throw at you." Anna's breath caught. Could a stranger see through her so easily? Her instinct was to retreat, to protect the fragile walls she had built. Yet something about his tone eased her guard. "Thank you," she whispered, the words trembling but real. Daniel nodded once, as if sealing an unspoken promise. Then, with a quiet wave, he walked into the night, leaving Anna standing at the gate with a heart that no longer felt entirely hollow. That night, lying in bed, Anna replayed the scene over and over. Liam's sneer, Daniel's calm defiance, the way the world had shifted because one person chose to speak. She still felt the sting of every cruel word, but for the first time in months, there was a thread of light woven into her thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't meant to end in silence, and somewhere deep inside she heard it again. That whisper she had first noticed in the car, the one that carried more than just her own fragile hope. "Hold on." It was softer this time, but clearer. She did. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the sheer curtains of Camille's apartment, but it felt muted, filtered through the fog of unease that still lingered from last night. The world outside went on, as usual, the hum of traffic, the distant bark of a dog butt inside. Her mind replayed the woman's warning over and over. "They'll come for you, Camille. They'll always do." She sat at the small kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. Across from her, an envelope lay open, the contract for the upcoming merger she'd been preparing for months. To most, it would look like a straightforward legal document. To Camille, it was a battlefield where every clause, every word, carried hidden meaning, and now she wasn't sure who was fighting alongside her or against her. Betrayal in the details, she flipped through the thick pages again, her sharp eyes scanning the lines she had already memorized. There, page 42. A sudden amendment. Subtle yet devastating, an added clause that shifted indemnity from the company to her department personally. It meant, if anything went wrong, she would shoulder the legal blame. Her breath caught. This hadn't been there. Before, she would have noticed. Someone had deliberately slipped it in. Camille leaned back, her pulse quickening. She thought of the nameless woman from last night. "Look closer. I'll make it your fault." The whisper wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy. The meeting at 10 sharp. She entered the conference room, contract folder tucked under her arm like a shield. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, but beneath that Camille swore. She could sense the metallic temps of deceit. Her colleagues were already seated. Mr. Halden, her direct supervisor, with his practiced smile. Miss Ruiz from finance, typing something furiously on her tablet. And Brent, a junior associate who always avoided her gaze. "Morning, Camille," Halden said, his voice light, almost too casual. "Did you get a chance to review the final version of the contract?" "Final version?" The phrase hit her like a hammer. "Yes," she replied evenly, sliding into her chair. "And I noticed some adjustments." Halden raised his brows, feigning surprise. "Adjustments?" Camille opened the folder and tapped the offending page. "This clause, page 42. It wasn't in the previous draft. The room went silent, save for the faint buzz of the ceiling lights. Brent shifted uncomfortably, while Ruiz avoided eye contact altogether. Halden chuckled, though his eyes didn't. Ah, yes. Standard risk allocation. Just a minor update from legal counsel. Nothing to worry about. But Camille could feel it. The threads of betrayal tugging at her, tightening. Funny, she said softly, that this minor update puts my entire department at personal risk. Halden's smile faltered just for a moment, the unraveling mask by the time the meeting ended, Camille knew. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. It was intentional. The trap had been set, and she'd almost walked right into it. As the others filed out, Halden lingered. He placed a hand on the back of her chair, leaning close enough that she could smell the faint cologne he always wore. His tone dropped, no longer polished but sharp. You're a bright woman, Camille. Don't make trouble where there doesn't need to be any. Her pulse quickened. He knew she'd seen through it. Halden's hand tightened on the chair for a beat longer, then released. He straightened, mask back in place. We'll talk later. Camille didn't respond. She simply gathered her folder and walked out, every step heavy with the realization. The warning wasn't about strangers. It was about them, the people closest to her. A text in the dark that night, unable to rest, she paced her apartment. The city outside glittered through her windows, but to her, it looked like broken glass. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You saw it, didn't you? Her heart lurched. Fingers trembling, she typed back. Who is this? 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then the reply. I was in the car last night. Meet me tomorrow. 9 p.m., Pier 12. Come alone, Camille froze. The stranger, the one who had whispered the warning. They were reaching out. Her instincts screamed to ignore it. But something deeper told her she couldn't. For now, she had uncovered only the threads of betrayal. Tomorrow, she might finally see the whole tapestry. Detective Marcus Hale hadn't planned on returning to Crestwood. After the trial of Jonathan and Evelyn Vance, he thought he had closed that chapter of his career and of his conscience. Testimony of their daughter, little Claire, had left a scar on his heart. He remembered the smallness of her voice in that courtroom, the way she clutched a worn rabbit doll, while recounting nights of whispers and fear.
Ow.
It was enough to keep him awake for weeks. And when the verdict was read, when the world declared her safe, Marcus allowed himself to believe it was over. But some cases don't end with the gavel's strike. Some linger like smoke in an old room, staining everything long after the fire has gone. That morning, Marcus sat in his cramped city apartment, a coffee gone cold in his hand. His phone buzzed once, twice, then again. Each time, it was the same name, Dr. Lillian Cross, Crestwood's only psychologist with clearance to treat. Claire, after the trial, he ignored the first call. He ignored the second. But when the third came, something in his chest tightened. He answered, Detective Hale. Dr. Cross's voice was hushed, clipped at the edges, as though she feared being overheard. I need you back in Crestwood. It's Claire. The name alone was enough. His grip on the mug faltered. What happened? Doctor. Cross exhaled shakily. She's hearing voices again, whispering, not in dreams. Not in memories, she says they're in the house. And Marcus, she's not the only one. A chill rippled through him.
What do you mean? My foster mother has reported them too. Footsteps, cold drafts, and last night.
A note. The detective rose from his chair, already pulling on his jacket. A note. Her voice dropped lower. It said, You're not safe. Crestwood hadn't changed. It still wore that same hushed, timeless look, as though the town itself had secrets buried beneath every cracked pavement stone. Marcus drove past the diner where he had once interviewed locals, past the courthouse steps where Evelyn Vance had collapsed when the verdict was read. It felt less like returning to a place and more like stepping back into a memory he had tried too hard to forget. Dr. Cross met him at her office near the edge of town. She looked paler, thinner, her eyes lined with fatigue. She pressed a folder into his hands before even offering a greeting. These are the notes Claire's foster mother has been keeping. Strange noises, doors opening on their own. Claire saying she hears her father's voice calling her. Marcus flipped through the pages. Each entry grew darker. April 5th. Claire wouldn't sleep. Said someone whispered in her ear, "I'll find you." April 10th. Footsteps in the hall. But everyone was in bed. April 13th. Found a note under the back door. Block letters. No signature. "Where's the foster family now?" Marcus asked. "With relatives. I thought it best to move them out until we understand what's happening." He nodded, then glanced up at her. "You don't think this is just trauma?" Dr. Cross hesitated. I still want to. Act. But Marcus, Claire isn't making this up. I've seen fear before. This is terror. And whoever is behind it knows exactly which scars to press. That evening, Marcus drove out to the foster home, a modest house on the outskirts, surrounded by barren trees that clawed at the sky. Inside, dust motes hung thick in the air. He walked the halls slowly, listening. Every creak of the floorboards echoed louder than it should have. In Claire's room, he found the rabbit doll sitting neatly on the pillow. A tremor passed through him. He reached down, brushing a finger over its worn ear. "Detective Hale." The voice behind him nearly made him start. It was Claire herself, standing in the doorway. She looked taller than he remembered, her curls tied back, her eyes older than her years. But there was no mistaking the unease in her stance. "I thought you were gone," she said softly. "I was," Marcus admitted. "But sometimes, when the past isn't finished with us, we don't get to stay gone." She stepped inside, clutching the doorframe. Their back, his chest tightened. "Whispers." Claire nodded. "Last night I heard him, my dad. He said my name, just like before. But when I looked, no one was there." And then she trailed off, eyes flickering toward the dresser. Marcus followed her gaze. Slowly, he pulled open the top drawer. Inside, beneath neatly folded shirts, was a piece of paper. His pulse quickened as he unfolded it. 2 words, scrawled in jagged ink. "Still here?" "Back at Dr. Cross's office." Marcus laid the note on the desk. "This isn't random," he said. "Someone is targeting her, as someone who wants her to believe." The Vances never left. Dr. Cross rubbed her temples. "But Jonathan and Evelyn are in prison." "You saw the doors close, yes?" Marcus replied grimly. "But prisons don't keep out loyalty. The Vances had allies. We both know it." Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain. "You think someone's continuing their work?" He didn't answer. Immediately, Steady stared at the note, at the sharpness of the handwriting. It felt deliberate, as if the strokes themselves were meant to cut. Finally, he said, "I think whoever wrote this doesn't just want Claire scared. They want her broken. They want us to believe the whispers never ended." That night, Marcus stayed at the foster house. He walked its halls in silence, flashlight in hand, ears pricked for even the faintest sound. At first, there was nothing, but stillness. Then close to midnight, he heard it. A whisper, so faint he thought he imagined it. Marcus, his grip tightened on the flashlight, turned sharply, scanning the hallway. Empty. Shadows stretched across the walls, bending, and curling like dark fingers. Then it came again. "You shouldn't have come back." The air grew colder, his breath misting. For a moment, against all logic, he thought, is it possible? Could the dead speak? But no. Marcus Hale didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in people. And people were often far more dangerous than anything that haunted the dark. Still, as he stood in that hallway, the voice curling around him like smoke, one truth lodged itself in his chest. The past wasn't finished with Claire. And it wasn't finished with him either. The city seemed to fold itself into silence after midnight. Most apartments were dark. Shops shuttered, and even the streets, once restless with horns and hurried footsteps, had quieted to a strange lull. But in Naomi's little living room, lights still burned. The curtains were drawn tight, a single lamp casting a golden circle across the coffee table, where scattered notes, files, and half-drunk cups of coffee stood like restless soldiers waiting. For orders, Naomi sat at the edge of the sofa, elbows on her knees, her hair tied back in a messy knot. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the rim of her cup, her mind still haunted by the memory of that car door shutting, by the whisper she couldn't forget. Across from her, Detective Harris leaned forward, his suit jacket discarded over the chair, his tie loosened. He had a look Naomi was slowly getting used to, the weary sharpness of a man who had seen too much, but still believed some wrongs could be made right. "All right," Harris said finally, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "We can't wait for them to make the next move. They've been watching you, testing you. That kind of pressure only has one purpose, to see how close you are to the truth." Naomi looked up, her eyes raw but steady. "So we make a move first." Harris gave a slow nod. "Exactly, but it has to be precise. If we expose too much too soon, they'll bury every trail we've got and maybe bury us with it." Laying out the map, Harris spread a folder across the table, revealing grainy photographs. Most had been taken secretly. A suited man getting into a black sedan, a handshake outside a private club, a shipment unloaded at a dockyard after midnight. Naomi recognized one of the faces instantly. Adrian Kessler, the cold-eyed man from the gala. "They call him the broker," Harris explained, tapping the photo. "Middleman between politicians and the syndicate. Never leaves fingerprints on the deals, never signs his name. But he's the one who keeps the web intact." Naomi's chest tightened. "And he knows about me." "Probably," Harris admitted, "but that may work in our favor. He underestimates you, sees you as a threat only if you speak too loudly." Which means, he trailed off, letting the implication hang. Naomi filled the silence. "Which means we whisper in the right ears and let him believe the storm is coming from somewhere else." Harris cracked the faintest smile. "You're learning faster than most rookies I've worked with." He drew out a crude map on a notepad marking locations. "Tomorrow night there's a gathering at the old Briarwood warehouse. Not on paper. Not public. That's where Kessler meets his contacts before funds move overseas. If we can get evidence, faces, ledgers, anything, we can build a chain strong enough to shake the city." Naomi felt a chill run down her arms. "A warehouse full of men who'd rather kill than be exposed." Harris shrugged. "That's why we don't go in blind." The silence packed the air between them, thickened as the plan took shape. Naomi found herself alternating between fear and focus, her heart pounding with the gravity of it all. Harris watched her closely. "You don't have to come with me. If I walk in with the wrong partner, it could end badly for both of us. But if you stay back, you'll be safer." Naomi straightened, her voice quiet but firm. "Safe doesn't mean anything anymore. Already tried to silence me. If I hide, I lose. If I step forward, maybe someone else doesn't have to feel what I felt in that car." Her words carried a fragile steel, and Harris let them linger before answering. "Then you're in. But from now on, no freelancing, no sudden detours. Every move you make, I need to know." Naomi nodded. For the first time, she felt less like a victim and more like a participant in a game far larger than herself. They stayed up through the night, whispering strategies, rehearsing contingencies. Harris taught her how to listen, not just to words, but to silences, pauses, the weight behind a phrase. Naomi told him about the whispers she'd overheard at the gala, about the way Kessler's hand had rested too casually on the mayor's shoulder. Piece by piece, the threads wove together. A net was forming, but it was fragile. One wrong pull, and it could unravel. Shadows on the street. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Harris finally rose. "Get some sleep," he said, gathering the papers back into the folder. "Tomorrow, everything begins." Naomi walked him to the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, though something about the silence felt heavier than usual. Harris noticed it too. His hand brushed against the inside of his jacket, where Naomi guessed a weapon rested. They exchanged a look. "I'll circle the block once," Harris murmured. "Keep your lights low after I leave." Naomi's pulse quickened as she closed the door behind him, sliding the lock into place. For a few moments, she stood in the dim glow of the apartment, listening. A car engine coughed somewhere in the distance. A floorboard creaked, too faint, too distant to be inside her unit, but enough to freeze her breath. She moved back to the table, gathering the scattered papers, her fingers trembling. Somewhere deep in her chest, the same whisper from that night seemed to echo again. You don't belong in this game. But this time, Naomi whispered back, so softly even she barely heard it. I do now. The fragile dawn when dawn finally arrived. It slipped through the curtains like a reluctant guest. Naomi hadn't slept. Her head rested against the sofa, her notes still in her lap. She blinked awake to the sound of her phone buzzing. A message. From Harris. Meet me tonight, Briarwood, midnight. Come prepared. She sat up slowly, her mind a swirl of exhaustion and determination. Something inside her shifted as she read those words. Tonight, there would be no turning back. Naomi closed her notebook, pressing her palm against its cover as though sealing a promise. The night of planning was over. The night of reckoning was coming, and she was ready to step into its shadows. The first light of morning crept through the blinds of the kitchen window, painting the countertops in muted gold. A faint stillness hung in the house, the kind that comes after nights of restless planning. Amelia sat at the table with a cup of untouched tea, her hands folded tightly in front of her, staring at the papers spread out like a map of dangers and choices. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the whisper again, the warning in the car. The pulse of betrayal, the sharp clarity of Thomas's plan. It all pressed down on her chest like a weight. But dawn had come, and with it, something shifted. Amelia wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't frozen. Instead, she felt an odd calm. The kind that follows a storm when the world still looks broken but the air feels cleaner. Across the table, Thomas adjusted his glasses and tapped his pen against the folder he had carried the night before. He looked exhausted, dark shadows under his eyes. But there was determination in the way he leaned forward. We don't have time to hesitate, he said softly. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched hers for resolve. They will move faster than we think. Last night gave us a plan, but plans only matter if we act. Amelia nodded. Then we act today. The words surprised even her. They were firm, almost unfamiliar. Somewhere between fear and defiance, she had found resolve. A house divided. Her father appeared in the doorway. His shoulders stooped in his robe, his expression one of guarded worry. He had overheard enough last night to know the truth had finally unraveled, but the depth of it still shook him. You're sure about this? He asked. His voice carried both fear and pride. Once you step into their world, there's no turning back. Betrayal leaves scars that don't heal. Amelia rose, walking toward him. She touched his arm gently, grounding herself in the warmth of his presence. I didn't step into their world, Father. They dragged me into it the moment they decided I was useful. Her tone trembled with restrained emotion. I can't keep hiding while others decide my fate. I won't. Her father's eyes shimmered with something between grief and admiration. He didn't argue further. Instead, he placed his hand on hers. Then may you find strength enough to finish what they started. Thomas cleared his throat. We should review once more. Every thread of betrayal is connected. We cut them carefully, and the whole web collapses. The names on paper on the table lay a series of handwritten notes, names underlined, arrows, drawn between them like a diagram of deceit. The whispers from the car, the intercepted emails, and the sudden appearances of strangers had all led here. Your uncle's involvement is deeper than we thought, Thomas said, tapping the name, circled in red. He's not just a bystander. He's a channel. Messages flow through him to others. Amelia's throat tightened. Her uncle, it's a man who had read her bedtime stories when she was a child, the one who used to sneak her candy when her mother wasn't looking. To see his name etched in ink beneath betrayal felt like a cut across her memories. And this, Thomas continued, pointing at another name, belongs to someone close to your father's company, a trusted advisor. We can't confront him directly yet, but he's been feeding information for months. Her father stiffened. I trusted that man with everything. If this is true, it is, Thomas interrupted firmly. Can't afford doubt. Amelia stared at the page. Her chest ached, but her resolve grew sharper. Every betrayal is a choice, and if they chose to use me, then I'll choose to end their game. A quiet conversation after her father stepped out to take a phone call. Amelia leaned closer to Thomas. "You never told me why you're helping me," she said quietly. "Could have walked away after last night. You don't owe me this." Thomas's gaze softened. He paused before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when betrayal wins. Years ago, I trusted the wrong person. It cost me someone I loved. I swore I wouldn't let another life be broken the same way. When I saw what they were trying to do to you, I couldn't stay silent." His voice cracked slightly, though his composure returned quickly. Amelia's chest warmed with a quiet understanding. Beneath his calculated calm was a man carrying scars, not unlike her own. "Then we fight together," she whispered, "the first move by late morning." The house no longer felt like a safe place to linger. The air seemed heavy with unseen eyes, the silence interrupted only by the ticking clock on the wall. Thomas insisted they act before noon. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to close their tracks," he explained. "We strike first. With precision, that's the only way." "What do we do?" Amelia asked. Thomas opened the folder, sliding out a set of photographs and documents. "We leak the smallest piece of truth to the right person, enough to shake their confidence. If they start doubting each other, they'll unravel faster than we ever could force them to." Amelia studied the faces in the photos. Every smile, every handshake now seemed poisoned. She felt both sorrow and clarity as she realized the path forward wasn't about mercy, it was about survival. Her hands trembled only slightly as she picked up the first photograph. A moment of still standing before the mirror upstairs.
"Amelia!"
Fixed her hair, her reflection showing the faintest lines of exhaustion, but also something new steel in her eyes. She whispered to herself, almost as if testing the strength of her resolve, "They wanted me silent, they wanted me blind. Today, I'll be neither." She straightened her shoulders, letting the sunlight bathe her face. For the first time since the whisper in the car, she felt in control not of everything but of her choice to fight. When she stepped back downstairs, Thomas looked at her for a long moment before nodding in approval. "You ready?" he said simply. Amelia took a deep breath, her heart pounding but steady. "Let's begin." And with those words, the quiet morning gave way to the first steps of war against betrayal. The morning sun was unforgiving, glaring off the steel-and glass, a facade of Graves Industries headquarters. The skyscraper rose like a fortress in the city skyline, its sharp lines daring anyone to challenge the power it contained. For many, walking through its revolving doors was an honor. For Evelyn and Michael, it was a descent into enemy territory. Evelyn adjusted the lapel of her blazer, her hand trembling slightly despite the steady rhythm of her breathing exercises. Michael noticed. "Breathe," he murmured, leaning close so only she could hear. "Nerves are good, they keep you sharp." She nodded, but the weight of what they carried pressed heavy on her. In the slim folder inside her bag lay evidence shards, of truth stitched together by late-night efforts, whispered confessions, and a stranger's courage. Enough, perhaps, to wound Graves. But wounds weren't victories. Victories came only if you lived long enough to deliver the blow. The marble lobby inside was vast, cold, and clinical. Polished floors reflected the towering abstract sculpture at its center, twisted metal form that seemed to sneer at all who entered. Security guards, tall and stone-faced, scanned ID cards and eyes with the precision of machines. Michael placed a reassuring hand at Evelyn's back as they moved forward. He had arranged their entry under the guise of consultants. Still, when the guard's eyes lingered a second too long on Evelyn, her heart nearly gave out. Finally, the beep of the scanner cleared them. The doors opened. They were in. The elevator climbed, floor after floor, each ding a drumbeat of rising tension. Evelyn stared at the glowing numbers above the doors. 32, Michael said. "That's where the preliminary meeting will be. A small conference room. Less risk." Graves won't appear until later, but Evelyn knew Graves. She had learned to anticipate his moves, the sudden appearances, the calculated intimidation. He didn't like whispers outside his control. He suspected even a shred of their purpose he would show. The doors opened to reveal a hushed corridor lined with frosted glass walls. The air smelled faintly of cedar and money. A secretary guided them into a room with a long oak table and leather chairs that gleamed under soft lights. Every detail screamed of power. Evelyn placed her folder carefully on the table. To anyone else, it looked like a presentation. To her, it was a lifeline. It was a lifeline. Michael leaned in close. Remember, we don't reveal everything today. We test the waters. Show them we know just enough to unsettle them. If Graves sends a ripple, we'll know we've struck the right nerve. She nodded, repeating the plan in her mind like a prayer. But before they could settle further, the door opened, and there he was, Victor Graves. He didn't wait for introductions, didn't bother with pretense. He walked in as though the very air belonged to him, his presence. Heavier than the marble below, man in his late 50s, hair silver at the temples, eyes as sharp and cold as cut glass. He smiled a thin, deliberate gesture that never reached his eyes. Well, he said, voice smooth as oil, the prodigal returns. His gaze locked on Evelyn. I was told you'd disappeared. Imagine my surprise when you show up here. In my house? Evelyn's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his stare. I'm not here to play games, Victor. Games. Graves stepped closer, resting one hand on the table, leaning down just enough to invade her space. Everything is a game, my dear. The only difference is who wins. Michael shifted subtly, his body angled like a shield. Graves noticed, but did not flinch. Instead, his attention darted to the folder on the table. He tapped it lightly with one finger, and what's this? Homework? Or perhaps a threat? Evelyn pulled the folder closer to herself. Evidence. Of things you don't want the world to see. For the first time, Graves' expression twitched barely, but enough. The smile thinned into something darker. Evidence is a fragile thing, he murmured. Easily lost, easily burned. Air between them crackled. Evelyn's pulse thundered, but she remembered Michael's words. Nerves keep you sharp. She straightened her back. Maybe, but memories are harder to erase. And there are people more than you think who remember. Graves studied her, eyes narrowing like a hawk considering its prey. Then he chuckled softly. You've grown teeth, Evelyn. I almost admire it. Turned, pacing slowly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back. But courage without strategy is suicide. Do you think walking into my building with a file makes you powerful? No, it makes you visible, and visibility makes you weak. Michael's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Evelyn knew why Graves wanted him to snap, to reveal desperation. Instead, she leaned forward. Maybe visibility is what you should fear. Because if something happens to me, to him, she motioned to Michael, this evidence doesn't die. It multiplies. The smile returned, but it was sharper now, almost predatory. Then I suppose I'll have to ensure nothing happens to you, at least not yet. A knock at the door interrupted the tension. A junior executive peeked in nervously. Mr. Graves, the investors are waiting. Graves didn't move immediately. He let silence stretch, as if to remind them who dictated time itself. Finally, he turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. Enjoy your stay, Evelyn. Lions. Den is educational. But do remember lions don't tolerate trespassers? The door shut with a quiet finality. For a long moment, neither Evelyn nor Michael spoke. The echo of Graves' presence lingered, like smoke after fire. Finally, Evelyn exhaled, her breath shaky. He knows, she whispered. Michael, he knows everything. Michael placed his hand over hers. Good, that means we hit the right nerve. Now, we move faster. Evelyn nodded, though fear churned inside her. She glanced at the folder again, realizing with a chill that Graves hadn't even needed to open it. He already knew what shadows lurked inside. But shadows, she reminded herself, were nothing against the light. And today, for the first time, she had dared to strike the match. The ballroom glowed with a golden sheen. Chandeliers scattering their light like fractured halos across the polished marble floor. The hum of violins and the low murmur of powerful voices filled the space, a symphony of wealth and hidden menace. For all its glamour, the air carried a chill the kind that clung to velvet curtains. Heavy with secrets, Lila had never felt smaller. Draped in the borrowed gown, her mask glittering under the candlelight, she stood at the edge of a world that was both dazzling and dangerous. Each step on the floor felt like walking into a painting where every detail was designed to distract. But behind the jewels and laughter lurked something darker, something she was here to uncover. Across the room, Anton watched her. His posture was calm, his eyes veiled behind his own mask. To anyone else, he was just another guest in tailored black, sipping wine, blending into the orchestra of wealth. But every muscle in his body was alert. He knew this night was a turning point, the night where allies would show themselves, where enemies would slip their masks. Remember, Anton had told her earlier, in the car, truth wears disguises. Don't trust the glitter. Listen to thee. Silences between words. Now those silences pressed against her ears like drumbeats. She didn't notice the man until he was suddenly at her side. His mask was silver, sharp-edged like the face of a hawk. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned more than just his own name. "You don't belong here," he said softly, almost kindly, though his words carried the weight of a threat. Lila forced her lips into a smile. "Neither do you," he chuckled, tilting his glass touche. "But I've learned that belonging isn't about truth, it's about illusion. Tonight, my dear, everyone is playing a role. Some are kings, some are jesters, and some his." Gaze swept over her, are pawns. The words stung more than she expected. But before she could answer, Anton appeared, his voice low and measured. "I see you've met Councilman Rourke," Anton said. His tone was polite, almost warm, but his eyes were sharp, locked on the man in silver. Rourke smiled, bowing his head. "Ah, Anton. Still wandering into lions' dens? Or have you finally learned to roar?" Their exchange was light, but the tension ran deep, threading between their words like a taut wire. Lila could feel it. Rourke's smirk was a mask, but behind it lay something calculating. Dangerous. Anton steered her away, his hand firm on her elbow. "That man has teeth," he whispered. "Don't let him bite." The night unfolded in a haze of introductions and veiled remarks. Men and women in ornate masks danced and laughed, their words laced with riddles. Some asked Lila questions about her connections. Others complimented her dress with an undertone that made her skin crawl. Every so often, she caught fragments of conversations, phrases like the shipment, the contract, and they'll never trace it back. Each piece was a thread in a tapestry she couldn't yet see. Anton moved like a shadow, guiding her through the currents of the crowd, whispering names and warnings. "That's Marin. She hides her cruelty under perfume. That's Devereaux. His smile is worth less than his lies. Don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself." Then came the moment that froze her blood. At the far end of the hall, seated like a monarch in her court, was Celine, the woman who had orchestrated more pain than Lila could fathom. Her mask was crimson and gold, but her eyes, visible through the thin slits, gleamed like shards of ice. People leaned toward her, eager for her attention, terrified of her dismissal. Anton's hand tightened on Lila's. "There she is." The serpent in silk. Selena's gaze swept the room, pausing for the briefest second on them. Lila felt it pierce straight through her mask, stripping her of the gown, the disguise, everything. She was no longer a guest in borrowed elegance, she was prey. The music shifted, the violins weaving into a darker tune. Celine rose, her presence commanding silence without a word. "My friends," she began, her voice soft yet carrying across the hall like a spell. "Tonight, we celebrate not only wealth, but resilience. The world beyond these walls is chaos. But here," she spread her arms, "we write the rules and we protect our own." Applause rippled through the crowd, though it sounded more like obedience than admiration. Lila's chest tightened. These weren't just socialites, they were architects of power, the kind who fed on silence and shadows. And Celine was their queen. When Celine's eyes returned to hers, Lila felt something stir. A recognition. As if Celine knew exactly who she was and why she was here. Anton leaned closer, his whisper urgent. We need to leave now. But before they could slip away, Celine spoke again. And tonight, she said, her lips curving into a smile that chilled the room, we welcome new faces among us. Faces that remind us fresh blood keeps old power alive. Her gaze locked on Lila. The crowd turned. Whispers spread like smoke, and Lila realized with a jolt of terror that the night wasn't about blending in anymore. It was about survival. The room pulsed with silence. The gala, which only moments ago had been alive with laughter, chatter, and the crisp clink of champagne glasses had shifted into something taut and unsettling. Faces once hidden behind masks now seemed sharper, more suspicious. The air itself felt heavy, carrying whispers like smoke curling through the velvet-draped hall. At the center of it all stood Lena. Her mask still clung to her face, but her eyes, those dark, steady eyes, were unveiled enough to pierce through the glamour. She was still, too still, as though her silence alone carried the weight of what she had just heard. Across the room, the voice of Mr. Crane, the silver-haired chairman with too many secrets tucked behind his genteel smile, broke the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, raising his glass with mechanical calm, it seems a moment of tension has interrupted our evening.
Oh, surely nothing more than a misunderstanding.
They were waiting, all of them, for Somione to break this careful illusion, and then it happened. A low voice, cool and deliberate, cut through the thick air. Is it still a misunderstanding? The man said, stepping forward. If the missing millions are not only unaccounted for, but hidden behind a trail of falsified accounts. It was Armand. He hadn't spoken much through the night, had kept his presence folded into the edges of the room, just another elegant mask in the crowd. But now his words thundered louder than a shout, carrying the power of certainty. The heads in the hall turned like flowers straining toward the sun, their gazes snapping to him. A ripple of alarm crossed the guests. And for Lena, for the first time that evening, her heart allowed itself to beat with something more than dread, because he had chosen to speak, and in doing so, he had chosen a side. Crane's expression didn't falter, but his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Big words. Young man, he said smoothly, but empty ones, unless you have the proof to accompany them. We both know such proof does not exist. Armand smiled faintly, though it was a smile that held steel. On the contrary, he said, slipping a slim black folder from the inner pocket of his jacket. Proof exists. Tonight, for the first time, it refuses to remain hidden. The silence deepened, becoming almost suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. Lena's hand gripped the edge of the table beside her. She had known the folder. Existed. She had helped him find it. Had risked more than she ever admitted to get those ledgers into his hands. But she had not expected him to reveal them now in this place, under the eyes of so many who would rather burn the truth than ever let it see daylight. The tension was a blade. Every second stretched it thinner. Finally, a voice broke, sharp, panicked. This is nonsense, barked one of the board members, his mask tilted to reveal his flushed face. Lies concocted by children who don't understand the weight of responsibility. Do you have any idea the damage you're doing? But Armand's gaze did not shift. He opened the folder slowly, methodically, and laid the first document on the table beneath the glowing chandelier. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like a surgeon cutting with precision. These numbers don't lie, he said. Transfers masked as charity donations, shell companies under borrowed names. And every path leads back here, to this room. To the people wearing these masks, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward, some leaned away. And Lena, her breath caught like it was tangled in her throat, knew that this moment was the axis on which their lives would turn. But the unveiling wasn't done. Because Armand did not look at Crane. Not directly. Instead, he shifted his gaze sideways toward Lena. And in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about exposing her to her past. Her silence. Her compliance. For a heartbeat, her world threatened to shatter. But instead of shrinking, Instead of collapsing under the sudden weight of eyes turning toward her, Lena straightened. She reached for her mask with trembling fingers and pulled it free. The room seemed to inhale at once. Her face, unhidden, was not the face of the timid assistant she had once been. It was a face hardened by nights of betrayal, sharpened by the courage of choices she hadn't wanted to make but had made nonetheless. And when she spoke, her voice carried with it the quiet authority of truth. "He's right," she said, the words trembling but unwavering. "I've seen the documents. I've watched the transfers. I know what was stolen. I know who it was stolen from." The masks didn't just crack, they shattered. The faces of the board members and their partners turned pale, their power momentarily stripped by the weight of revelation. Crane's voice rose again, harsher this time. "You don't know what you're doing, Lena," he said, his charm faltering. "Think carefully. If you continue, you destroy yourself along with us. Do you think any of them will thank you for this truth? You think the world cares about your unveiling?" Lena's eyes didn't waver. "This isn't about thanks," she said softly. "It's about silence. I refuse to be silent. Any more?" The hall erupted into chaos. Some guests shouted, others scrambled for the exits. The air was thick with fear, anger, denial. And amid it all, Lena and Armin stood side by side, their silence louder than all the noise. But even as the truth lay naked on the table, a deeper dread curled in Lena's stomach, because exposing them here, in this den, was only the first step. And she knew with the kind of certainty that chills the bones that the retaliation had already begun. And when it came, it would be merciless. The ballroom, once a place of glittering performances, now held a silence heavy enough to press against the ribs of those inside. Secrets had been aired, alliances shaken, and the powerful stood vulnerable for the first time in years. Yet, amidst all the broken truths, a sound broke the stillness, soft, clear, and wholly unexpected. It was the voice of a child, from the corner where servants had gathered to keep watch. A small boy, no older than 9, stepped forward. His black shoes tapped lightly on the polished marble floor, echoing louder than any thunderclap. His wide, solemn eyes carried no fear, only a question that sliced sharper than any accusation. "Why do grown-ups lie so much?" he asked. The words fell into the room like a stone tossed into a pond, rippling through every pair of ears. For a moment, no one breathed. Even Leona, who had rehearsed arguments and unveiled corruption with precision, stood still, caught off guard. The boy's mother, a quiet housemaid who had served unnoticed for years, tried to pull him back, sporning his name in fear. But the boy shook free, his small frame trembling with the courage only innocence could give. "You," he pointed toward. "Victor Armand, the patriarch whose empire had been built on shadows. You said people should be strong, but then you trick them, take their money, and leave them weak." Gasps traveled across the ballroom. Armin's jaw tightened, his usually commanding presence flickering as if a mirror had cracked within him. The boy turned, his gaze moving toward Cassandra, once the loyal protege, now revealed to be a schemer in her own right. "And you said you cared about the workers, but you just wanted power too. That's lying."
Us.
Cassandra's lips parted, but no words emerged. Her carefully constructed armor seemed to crumble under the weight of a child's clarity. Finally, the boy looked at Leona. "And you told the truth. But why are you shaking?" Leona exhaled slowly, realizing only then how her hands trembled at her sides. She lowered herself to meet the boy's eyes, her voice gentle. "Because, little one, telling the truth is the hardest thing of all. It costs you pieces of yourself." The boy tilted his head, as if trying to understand. "But isn't it better than lying? Lying makes everything broken." Silence again. But this time, it was different, not the silence of fear or schemes, but one of reflection. Victor shifted in his chair, his voice deep but unsteady. "Children speak simply because they do not understand the weight of this world." The boy frowned, undeterred. "Maybe the world is heavy because grown-ups keep filling it with lies." Those words struck harder than any accusation. Some of the guests lowered their eyes, some clenched their fists. Few even wiped at tears they hadn't realized had formed. Leona reached for the boy's hand. steadying her own voice as she addressed the room. Here, in this hall of power, a child has given us the truest lesson. All of our games, our betrayals, our plots, they mean nothing if the innocent cannot trust us. What use is empire if its foundation is built on lies so thick even a child can see through them? Her words echoed, carried not by force, but by the raw honesty in her tone. Victor looked away, his empire flashing before him, deals signed in. Shadows, allies bought with silence, workers crushed under contracts no one dared question. Cassandra shifted uneasily, reminded of her own reflection in the boy's words. Power without integrity was emptiness. For a fleeting moment, the weight of legacy seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The boy, unaware of the storm he had stirred, squeezed Leona's hand and whispered to her. Though the room was so still, everyone could hear, "Don't let them be mean anymore." Her throat tightened, her vision blurring with tears she hadn't allowed herself until now. "I promise," she whispered back. It was then that the investigator, watching from the back, stepped forward. His sharp eyes softened as they met the boys. Sometimes, it takes the youngest among us to remind us what matters most. Truth, kindness, fairness, things we forget while chasing crowns of smoke. The ballroom seemed to breathe again, but differently, as though the child's words had cracked the walls of deceit that held it together. Some guests began murmuring, not with suspicion, but with uneasy self-awareness. Altogether, as if they could not bear the reflection of themselves in the boy's simple honesty. Victor Armand, for the first time in decades, leaned back and closed his eyes. His voice, when it came, was low. Perhaps I've been building on sand all this time. Cassandra, too, found her resolve faltering. She clenched her fists but whispered almost to herself, and I thought I was smarter than all of them. Leona rose, still holding the boy's hand. She did not need grand speeches now. The truth had already been spoken small, simple, and undeniable. As dawn light began to filter through the high windows, illuminating the fractured but hopeful faces of those inside, it was clear the evening had shifted. The games of power had been pierced not by strategy, but by a killed's unyielding clarity. For in the end, it was not betrayal nor courage, nor unveiling that left the deepest mark. It was a lesson only the innocent could teach, that lies may build empires, but only truth can keep them standing. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the community hall, catching motes of dust that drifted lazily in the air. Where once there had been tension, secrecy, and dread, now there was a new warmth. The hall was filled with chatter, the kind of chatter that grows when people realize they are no longer bound by silence. At the front, Mia stood beside Detective Harris, her small hand nestled in his. Her eyes carried a spark of something fresh, something the dark days had almost stolen away. Hope, the corrupt network that had slithered through the town's veins, had been exposed. Its influence shattered under the weight of truth. Those who once held the reins of fear were gone and masked, handcuffed, and powerless. Yet even as justice was served, Mia understood that endings were rarely neat. Healing would take time, but healing at least had finally begun. A voice that could not be silenced. The townsfolk looked to Mia not with pity, but with admiration. They had seen how a girl's voice, quiet but unwavering, had pulled down walls, built on lies. "Mia," the teacher called softly, tears glistening in her eyes, "you've shown us more courage than many of us had in years. You reminded us what it means to stand, even when standing alone." Mia blushed, looking down at her shoes. "I wasn't alone," she whispered. Her gaze turned to Harris, then to the faces of those who had stepped forward after her bravery had lit the way. "None of us are if we just stop pretending." The words rippled through the crowd, a gentle but powerful reminder that silence had been the weapon of the guilty. And breaking it, that was the victory of the innocent. The child's lesson later. Outside in the garden, where the morning air smelled of fresh grass and new beginnings, Mia tugged at Harris's sleeve. "Detective," she asked softly, "do you think it's really over?" Harris crouched down so that their eyes met. His voice was calm, carrying the gravity of experience but the gentleness of someone who believed in her. The danger is over, yes, but what you've done, Mia. It doesn't just end here. You've planted something. People will remember your courage, and they'll carry it. You've taught us a lesson. Most adults forget that truth is stronger than fear. Mia's brow furrowed for a moment, as though she were processing words much larger than herself. Then, slowly, she smiled. A town awakens. The weeks that followed carried change like the slow but certain shift of seasons. The shadows that had loomed over every street corner seemed lighter now. The town's leaders, once puppets of corruption, had been replaced by people chosen for their honesty, their accountability, and among it all, Mia's voice continued to echo not through speeches or grand gestures, but in the everyday ways. She lived. She spoke up in school, unafraid to challenge cruelty. She encouraged classmates to share their truths, no matter how small. Her bravery became a mirror others could see themselves in. Detective Harris remained in the town longer than expected, not just as an investigator, but as a protector, a mentor, and quietly a friend. He knew the story of Mia's strength would outlive both of them. But for now, he stayed to ensure her world remained safe, so her childhood could return to what it should have always been, a time of growth, laughter, and wonder. The new beginning one. Evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in strokes of gold and crimson, Mia sat on the porch steps of her home. Her mother was inside cooking dinner, the comforting scent of bread drifting into the air. Mia hugged her knees and whispered into the fading light, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who the thanks was for, perhaps for Harris, perhaps for her mother, perhaps for the town that had finally opened its eyes, or perhaps for herself, for the part of her that hadn't given in, that had dared to be strong when strength seemed impossible. As the first stars began to appear, Mia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The past was not erased. The scars would remain. But she had proven something unshakable. Even the smallest voice, spoken with honesty and courage, could change the world around it. The world beyond her porch was wide, full of shadows yet to face. But Mia no longer feared them. She was ready, and so the story of betrayal and silence closed not with despair but with the quiet promise of a new beginning. End of story.